We here at Kink Candid are pleased to tell you a little bit more about Anchor. Anchor is our new podcast hosting software. We are in love with it. Anchor is the easiest way I have found to make a podcast. It'll give everything you need in one place, all for free, which is awesome. And you can use it from your phone or your computer. Their creation tools helped us record our first little blurb episode and edit so that it sounds great. Got music and everything else you can add to it. It's fantastic. They will handle the distribution of your podcast for you, so you can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple, Google, and much, much more that I don't even know about yet. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. You just have to do some ads just like this. So if you're interested in getting your podcast going with Anchor, go download the Anchor app on your iPhone or Android phone, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome to a new segment here in King Candid. This is the Soapbox. Today you have Shay's Soapbox. There will potentially be some Jay's Soapboxes or Munchkin Soapboxes too. However, today you get Shay. These are short segments. Most of the King Candid episodes are typically coffee table style. That's what we call it. And it's about discussion. And we've decided that certain topics justify a shorter, more informative style and less conversational. So that's what this is. Shay's Soapbox. Today I want to talk to you guys about aftercare. I know. It's a bit of a controversial topic these days. And the reason I started the soapbox is because the topic of aftercare has gotten, in my mind, a little bit corrupted. It's come to mean almost an idealized form of aftercare, and it's held to an incredibly lofty standard that I'm not entirely sure is appropriate. First, let's talk about the fact that there are two different kinds of aftercare. This is important because we talk about aftercare as sort of a monolith. It's one thing, or more specifically, it's one style, and many things. It's often sort of referred to in sort of a checklist style. You must check all the boxes for it to count as aftercare, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before we go any further, let's talk about the fact that there are two kinds of aftercare. There's physical aftercare and there is emotional aftercare. Physical aftercare is what I am most familiar with. It's what was most common when I started all those years ago. And physical aftercare is incredibly important. But it refers specifically to ensuring the physical safety, or, for lack of a better term, okayness of your partner after some of the heavier physical play. Some of what we do in this lifestyle is potentially dangerous or physically strenuous, and that does require some physical care for your partner. If you have engaged in heavy impact play, particularly with your, single tail style tools and things like that, ensuring that the skin is cared for, whether that be lotion or cleaning or ice, what have you. Those sorts of things are incredibly relevant and are part of the maintenance of your submissive partner. If you wish to continue playing with your toys, you should not break them. Therefore, you must take care of them. And that makes physical aftercare incredibly important. Not all play requires physical aftercare. That's important to note. Some of what we do probably doesn't actually need it. A lot of what we do at my house really doesn't require aftercare. In my earlier days, I engaged in some much harder play, and those sorts of harder activities do require that sort of care. And so physical aftercare, while important, is something you should definitely talk about. You have every right as a bottom or submissive to expect it if it's needed, but it isn't always. So it depends a lot on what you do. And then there is emotional aftercare. And I don't want to discount that, because for some people and for some types of play, it is incredibly important. If you are engaged in your degradation and humiliation styles of play, then emotional aftercare might be very, very important. Emotional aftercare is where it gets sticky. Not every type of play requires it. Not every submissive needs it or requires it. Not every dominant is willing or capable of providing it. And that's where it gets a little dicey, because aftercare is something, especially when you're talking about emotional aftercare, that's something that you as individuals in your situation need to talk about, need to negotiate, for lack of a better term, need to clarify. You need to express your needs as a submissive. I require X type of aftercare for X reasons with X type of play. Your dominant is responsible for explaining what it is and clarifying what it is they can and will or will not or cannot provide to you in that realm. So you don't inherently, in my opinion, have a right to expect emotional aftercare. And that's where people get offended. You have a right to need it. You have a right to want it, and you have every right to not play with someone who is not willing or capable of providing the type of aftercare that you personally need for the type of play that you're doing. All of those things are very true. However, what you do not, in my opinion, have a right to do is expect that there is some standard of emotional aftercare that is required of every dom in every situation, and that you shouldn't have to communicate those needs or negotiate those boundaries because it's a standard practice. And I see that said a lot, that it's a standard practice and that aftercare is non-negotiable. Nonsense. Of course it's negotiable. Everything we do is negotiable. There is no standard practice. And you'll hear me say that a lot in these soapbox episodes too. There is absolutely no standard practice in this lifestyle. There just isn't. Everyone does it the way that they do it, and they do it the way that works for them. And if you have a specific style that works for you, or you have certain needs that are non-negotiable for you, then you have every right to set those boundaries. And I'm not saying you have to accept any particular level of aftercare. I am simply saying that you do not have a right to demean or belittle or drag the name through the mud of any dominant who doesn't provide the aftercare you need if you haven't had that discussion. If you've had the discussion and they agreed to provide X form of aftercare and then did not, then you have every right to be upset. But you don't have a right to be upset at the idea that they have violated some unwritten standard practice rule, because there just isn't one. So negotiate your aftercare. Talk to your partners. If you have needs in that area, let them know. But don't expect them to follow some book in your head. You have this checklist in your head that aftercare includes this, and this in that order. And that's often the case. I'm finding that a lot of submissives have a very defined sort of checklist of things that they need for their own aftercare. And I don't have one, but if you do, far be it from me to tell you you're doing it wrong. I very rarely tell anyone they're doing it wrong. But don't expect that just because that's what's in your head means it's in anybody else's. And don't expect that me to agree that your dom, or the dom you played with more often, is a bad dom or a bad person or an abuser or what have you, because he didn't follow the unspoken checklist in your head. He doesn't have that checklist. That's your checklist. And yes, the dominant has a responsibility to express what forms of aftercare they are willing and capable of providing, but you have just as much responsibility to say, I require this, and this. Are you capable of providing that? Are you willing and capable of providing that? And if they say no, you have every right to say, okay, I'm sorry, but I can't engage in this sort of play with you because that will not work for me. But you don't have a right to say, I need aftercare, and then get angry because he violated some form of unwritten checklist in your own head. And I see this happen all the time. Like, I really do. I follow a lot of social media in various locations that relates to the lifestyle and what it is we do. And I see this happen a lot. Well, I needed this and I needed that and he didn't do that, so I didn't get aftercare. Well, not necessarily. What you didn't get was the kind of aftercare you wanted or needed. And it's okay for you to want or need that, but he didn't know that. And you didn't tell him. And that's not fair. A pet peeve that has recently gotten under my skin that I think needs to be talked about is expecting forms of aftercare that are illogical given the relationship or lack thereof that you are engaged in at this time. This is where it gets a little controversial, I'm aware. I will warn my audience that as I said earlier today, I am a veteran submissive. I have been doing this a very long time. I have strong opinions, and I'm not afraid to voice them, with the caveat that the opinions voiced on this show are just that, my opinions. Take them with a grain of salt. Don't take them at all. That's completely up to you. But these are my thoughts on various topics. When I started, the vast majority of people who do the things that we do were engaged in some form of a committed relationship. Be that boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, be that polyamorous, monogamous, what have you. They were engaged in some kind of a romantic relationship with the person they were playing with. There were, of course, some that were not, but the majority that I encountered throughout the years when I started were engaged in those sorts of romantic relationships. And that led to a certain style of handling things. And emotional aftercare wasn't something I really heard a whole lot about. Simply because in a committed romantic relationship, the emotional aftercare needs are often already being met. They're met by virtue of being in a relationship. They're met by the affection and kindness shown to you by this person that you are engaged in this relationship with. But currently, as a society and as a community, so to speak, and I hesitate to use the phrase community because we're not the Borg. There is no collective. But I'm seeing more often, and I've got a finger on the pulse via social media, watching, kind of seeing what's common, what's trending, so to speak. And I'm seeing a far higher percentage than I used to of people who are engaged in various forms that are not committed romantic relationships. I see a lot of, this is my dominant or this is my submissive, but we aren't in a romantic relationship. He's my dom, but not my boyfriend, so to speak. Or a lot, we're not in a relationship, but every X amount of time we get together and we have play dates, so to speak. Essentially a friends with benefits style relationship. Now, personally, I do not engage in the lifestyle in that fashion. For one, I am a married woman. For two, I need the emotional connection, the trust, that connection to the person that I am playing with. I cannot comfortably, myself personally, engage in these forms of play with someone that I am not romantically involved with. I just can't. It doesn't work. Now, that's very personal, and your mileage may vary, as I am fond of saying. However, I find that I notice a trend of I'm not in a relationship with this person. We get together every so often to play. Whether that's we get together once a week because we're, dom and sub, or we're more friends with benefits and we get together every few months, or, what have you. There's various sort of configurations that these arrangements can take, but it trends toward we're not in a relationship. This is not my romantic partner. Which, okay, if you can engage in this play without them being your romantic partner, then by all means go for it. Fine. However, I then find that they get very frustrated, people do, because they're not getting the emotional aftercare that they think they should be getting. And I notice that what seems to be happening is we get together and play. We do X, Y, and Z that are, physical. It's a scene, as it were. And the physical aftercare is being provided. This person is taking the time to ensure that they are physically safe and physically okay. I have met their physical needs. But then people are angry. He didn't stay the night. He didn't come over the next day. He didn't call me or text me in a couple of days to ensure that I wasn't going through sub-drop. I'm going to do an entire one of these soapboxes on sub-drop, by the way, because I think that term is getting used to mean a lot of things that it really doesn't mean. But that's another soapbox for another day. And I've literally seen, we met up, we played, he stayed the night, he left the next day, didn't come back, and wasn't communicating with me enough. And therefore, he wasn't providing proper aftercare. I'm going to come right out and say it. You're expecting boyfriend behavior from a friends with benefits. And that's not fair. You want boyfriend behavior. You want the commitment. You want him to stay the night. You want him to cuddle and watch a movie. You want him to call you or text you the next day and how are you doing, etc., etc., etc. The problem is that you didn't negotiate that. That isn't something you discussed. He did not agree to provide these things because you didn't specifically ask him. You just expected that he should. And the problem is you're expecting him to do these things because that's what a boyfriend would do. That's what a romantic partner would do. And that's true. However, this is not your romantic partner. You don't have that commitment. You don't have that bond. And if you have a friends with benefits that you've met up with 3 times or 4 times or however many times, or you meet up every 2 months or 6 months or 8 months or what have you, and you want that we play on a Friday and he texts me on Sunday to make sure I'm doing okay emotionally, if you want that, fine, but you should either, and this is my preferred option, seek out a romantic partner who is going to automatically provide that sort of aftercare and that sort of emotional support to you, or at the very least, specifically request and negotiate it. But that's not what happens. What happens is this person comes and says, oh, they didn't do that, and then people say things like, oh, they're just using you, they're treating you like a one-night stand, he didn't provide aftercare, he didn't take care of you, but you didn't negotiate that, he didn't agree to that, and he's not your boyfriend. And so, in summary, because I don't want these to get too long, if physical aftercare is absolutely a reasonable thing to expect in proportion to the level of physical play that you have done. You do not need the same level of aftercare after a hand spanking as you do after playing with whips. Point blank. You just don't. But expecting that you will receive the type of aftercare commensurate with the type of play you have engaged in is a reasonable expectation. And it's not one that you should have to negotiate, honestly. Physical aftercare is sort of a given. Emotional aftercare is sticky. If you want it, then you either need to be in a romantic relationship where those needs are going to get met automatically without having to discuss it, because that's what a romantic relationship looks like, or you need to negotiate it with them. Because if you're expecting boyfriend behavior from your friend with benefits, you are going to end up disappointed, and you're going to come and you're going to rant in our social media forums and tell us what a bad person and a bad dominant he is. And honestly, he isn't. You just had different expectations and you didn't communicate them. And finally, aftercare is not a holy grail checklist. It does not have to include a laundry list of things that your dominant partner must do. They must get you a glass of water. They must wrap you in a blanket. They must cuddle you. They must watch a movie. They must get you a snack. They must do this. They must do that. They must do... No. What aftercare looks like is going to vary. There is no standard. And if your aftercare list exceeds 2 or 3 things that you want or require, then you probably should reevaluate what your needs are. And more importantly, you should definitely be communicating and not expecting that every dominant is going to agree or should agree to provide the laundry list checklist that you have in your own head as to what aftercare is. Talk to your partner. It's only fair.